Hello, this video is going to look at planning and delivering an essay that focuses on that booze-happy bozo, Eric Birling. Now, we'll look at an exam question, then we'll churn out a plan, and then it's welcome to Planet Top Marks Population U as I take that plan and spin it into examiner-oring essay paragraphs. Now here, you've got my very short and sweet translation of the examiner's criteria. This is the mark scheme that he uses to judge you in the exam hall. And I'm going to paraphrase these sentences, though you're advised to read them at your leisure. Basically, what you want to be doing is writing 3 to 6 ideas, 3 to 6 key points in response to the exam question. You really want to foreground quality over quantity. Nobody wants to see 10 pages of rubbish. Once you've done that, you also want to be thinking about a formal or a critical style. Avoid the slang and tonking those appropriate terms, that key terminology, capitalist this, laissez-faire that. As long as you're using those words accurately, appropriately, that's going to season, that's going to jazz up your work no end. You're going to be putting evidence in to back up your points and your ideas. These are going to be quotes or references to the text. And then you're going to be interpreting this evidence. You're going to be explaining the meaning or the significance or the symbolism of that evidence. Finally, you're going to be looking at linking your ideas to contextual factors. Things about when the play was written, when the play was set, anything we know relevant about Priestley's life. I mean, here's a fascinating fact for you, folks, that you can dazzle people at dinner parties with. He had a son, did J.B. Priestley, called Tom Priestley. He was a famous Hollywood editor. And if you see pictures of him, the guy's got a moustache on him you could hide a canoe in. That's a fascinating fact. It's not really relevant though, is it? You're going to get nul point if you mention that in an exam. It's imperative that whatever contextual details you do add in are relevant, unlike that one. So here's the question we're going to wrestle with today, based very much around the Edexcel style of character-based question. Here we go. Explore how the character of Eric is important in the play. You must refer to the context of the play in your answer, and this exam board gives you 50 minutes, a maximum of 40 marks, 8 of which are derived from how well you use SPAG, spelling, punctuation and grammar. That's got to be accurate. You'll notice here that I've isolated key words in that question just to give us a clearer idea of what the examiner wants from us. I'll read the question again. Explore how the character of Eric is important in the play. You must refer to the context of the play in your answer. I've highlighted how there because what the examiner wants us to do is look at the things that Eric says and does that can be perceived as important, or things that are said or done to Eric that can be perceived as important in some way. And of course, we've got to mention context because we get marks for linking our ideas to the era it was set or written or details about Priestley. Here you can see how I break down my 50 minutes. If your teacher does it different, frankly, I would defer to them. But this is how I do it. I do 10 to 15 minutes for planning. When you see the quality of my exam responses, it really does derive from spending a lot of time thinking about what I'm going to say. Then I'm going to spend half an hour, 35 minutes writing the thing, turning it into good paragraphs. Finally, because of the SPAG mark, I'm really going to check over my work to make sure everything's accurate and coherent. It all makes sense and hangs together. So here's our first point or idea that we can plan around in response to that exam question, explore how the character of Eric is important in the play. We're going to mention the fact that Eric challenges his father in Act 1. Eric and his dad clash swords, they rattle sabres on the subject of the treatment of Eva and the poor. And a bit of evidence to support that assertion that bubbles to mind is when Mr. Birling explains that he sacked Eva for striking. Eric pipes up with something like, well, why shouldn't she ask for higher wages? And when we're explaining this evidence here, when we're interpreting it, we're going to try and shoehorn in, we're trying to squeeze in that nasty little booger, the word important, from the exam question. And I'm saying that this evidence, it's important because it shows the generational divide, the difference between old and young. And we're seeing the young here a little bit more receptive to socialist values, putting the interests of the many above those of the rich few. And we can build on that point and go deeper to secure a higher mark by saying that what's been revealed here is Eric's empathy with the proletariat, the poor. He's gravitating away from capitalist self-interest. He's beginning to think of people not merely as economic units, as labour or human livestock to sweat to death in your factory, but as people, human beings with the right to dignity. Let's bring in some context now. This play was written in 1945 when World War II was ending, and arguably we could say that Priestley wanted Britain to embrace a more socialist future. It's been reduced to rubble, the rebuilding the country physically, but also the soul of the country as well. The soul of the country, that wants rebuilding and reshaping too. And we can develop that contextual point by saying that Priestley was keen that Britain didn't revert to the laissez-faire model of governance that characterised the Edwardian era. Laissez-faire means when there's no state intervention, there's very light taxation. The rich, they can crack on making millions. The poor, well, hey, that's your lifestyle choice. We ain't giving you a dime, champ, you're on your own. Hence lots of people in grinding squalor and misery and poverty. And thanks to the miracle of coloured font, you can see here how I've taken those ideas from the plan and shaped them into this gorgeous paragraph. I'll give it a quick read through. If you want to at some point, have a look at that exam criteria from the start and see how closely this response accords with the examiner's wishes. In Act 1, we see Eric challenging the capitalist values of his father. On the subject of his striking, Eric asks, why shouldn't she ask for high wages? This engagingly conveys to the reader that Eric is gravitating towards more socialist views and away from the heartless self-interest that characterised his youth. This is important because it serves to promote Priestley's socialist message that we should foreground the needs of others over the wealth of a small social elite. Writing at the end of World War II, Priestley did not wish to see Britain return to a laissez-faire model of government, such as underpinned the Edwardian era, an era that did little to empower the proletariat. You'll notice in that second paragraph, 2 words I've underlined are important and because. Remember, important was one of those key words from the question, so I'm simply saying why this episode with Eric challenging his father is important, and because it's a nice launch pad for that explanation. And so on to our second point in response to this question about how the character of Eric is important in the play. We learn in Act 3 that Eric committed a theft, a criminal act. Yeah, naughty boy, he was caught dipping his hand into daddy's till like the feckless young booze hound he is. Now, if I'm planning a paragraph here, I don't think I'm going to faff around with a quotation here. I think a reference to the text is fine. He was stealing that money to support his pregnant lover, Eva Smith. And I suppose there are worse reasons for committing theft, but, legally and morally, it's still a crime. Oh, how's that for a money shot? I'm saying here that this is important, this scene, because we're seeing the ruling class as immoral, as unfit to rule. I mean, compare Eric, this representative, this cipher, this symbol of the upper class, to Eva, the cipher or symbol of the working class. Eva fights for workers' rights. She declines stolen money. I mean, she's practically got a harp and wings, this girl. She's angelic. She's an angel. And that contrast with Eric, the boozing, light-fingered toe rag, that serves to amplify his sinful nature. So I can now develop my explanation, my interpretation, by saying that, juxtaposed or placed side by side with Eva's moral integrity, it just amplifies the sense that this ruling class, this capitalist class, are unfit to dictate, to govern the lives of this worthy proletariat. Here's a contextual link that you might have seen before. An Inspector Calls was first performed in 1945 in Russia, not England. Now, right now, that's a pretty irrelevant contextual detail. That's down there with Tom Priestley's moustache. But we're going to develop it to make it relevant. Stay tuned. Ta-da! Because Russia was a communist country back then, 1945, the play's anti-capitalist stance, its anti-capitalist message, would have been very well received there. The Russian audiences would have been quite appreciative and receptive to Priestley's ideas. And once again, you can see how I've turned my feral mutterings, my rough and ready plan, into silken prose. Should probably have broken it up into 2 paragraphs, because at the moment it's just a big wall of words. That's going to annoy an examiner, so I should change that. But even so, that is an exam response so beautiful I could kiss the screen. And again, I've applied the colour coding so you can see how I worked up the plan into that finished paragraph. I won't read this one out, you can read this one at your leisure. An opportune moment to plug my ebook, which a lot of you good people have been buying. It really is win-win. I mean, you get a short, sweet read that's going to bolster your writing skills. I get, for about every 10 copies sold, the price of a pint of beer. So everyone's happy. This is my last paragraph on Eric, and I don't propose to read it out. You can read it at your leisure. What I will say though is that it's possible to work backwards from this paragraph to try and imagine what my plan looked like, because everything starts with a plan. Why have I underlined the word significant? Purely to draw your attention to a synonym, a word that means the same thing as important. Remember that key word from the question. Now, this isn't so much a top-mark response as it is something deserving of a knighthood for services to literary criticism. I mean, if you don't get it, if you don't understand it after reading it, it's not because you're thick or out like that. It's just this is knocking on the door of an A grade at A level. You know, higher grade responses don't get much higher than this. And that's us, folks. An Edexcel exam response on Eric, deconstructed like a champ. If you're interested, I've got a video that looks at an Inspector Gould exam response, and I believe there's a paragraph there that you could very easily tweak to address an Eric-based question. It's about the rape that he commits on Eva. Worth looking out for. Anyway, it's time to bow out, accompanied by my daughter's divine pictures, as they say in Italy. Ciao Bella.